Welcome to the Queer Spirit Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Venegoni. Here we have conversations with artists, healers, and activists who enliven the LGBTQ communities and who empower our queer spirits to flourish. My guest today is NiJas Whitson. NiJas is a multi-award-winning queer, trans, non-binary artist and futurist, a wound and medicine worker noted by Brooklyn Magazine as a culture influencer. They are a United States Artist Fellow, Creative Capital, and two-time Bessie Awardee who engages transdisciplinarity through a critical intersection of the sacred and conceptual in Black, queer, and transembodiedness. Today, NiJas shares about their artistic and spiritual origins and coming from a lineage of dreamers. We talk about their current project, the Illumination Catalog, a ceremony project honoring Black, trans, and gender nonconforming lives and communities across Turtle Island. Find them online at nijawhitson.com. That's NiJawhitson.com. Hi, NiJas. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Nick. Thank you for having me on the show.
So, NiJas, you are a multidisciplinary artist and creator, and it seems like you do a lot of different things in your work and in your practices. And before we get to talking about your projects, I wondered if you could start by telling us a little story or some background about how you first started exploring and discovering your creative processes in your life, how they emerged for you.
Thank you. I'll share that with two quick stories. I was, as a college student, traveled to Tanzania, Africa, to study women of the Black Panther Party in political exile, and had the beautiful serendipitous fortune of connecting with several Black Panthers that were there at the same time. And there was a moment where I spoke with someone who had been an artist there who had become a good friend about my name, and was noticing the way people were saying my name. And he asked me these questions about my birth, and explained to me that the meaning of my name there means one who is coming. So NiJas, as a kind of becoming, as a kind of creation story in itself, coming into the world in that way, has always felt really important to me, and important information about my possibility in the world. And I've also had the wonderful, in that research moment, was called in by them this was not long after 9/11 and the passage of the Patriot Act. And while watching a news moment, they, turned to me and was like, well, what are you going to do? And you're doing this research, you're an artist, that's the next thing in your world. How will your work address liberation? How will it be radical? How will it be revolutionary? So, that hearing that question from folks who had experienced exile, who were experiencing exile, folks who were political prisoners and had sacrificed a great deal for Black liberation, has remained a call for me, and has remained kind of the base level at which the stakes reside for me as an artist. Mm-hmm. So that's later in my life, but were certainly moments that really helped align me into being a creative practitioner.
Mm-hmm. And as a child, were you a dancer or a musician or a poet or anything like that? Were those things that you explored and studied and practiced as a kid?
Definitely. I was a writer really, really young. My family for them, that was like, yes, this person, not just going to be a writer, which I also am, and was also dancing. I was on the dance teams in the neighborhood. I had a battle squad, was always dancing, and just creative. I am a middle child. So, you're a middle child, you got to keep yourself busy. So I had lots of imagination and activity to keep me occupied as a little one.
And I know another significant aspect of your work is your spiritual practice. And if I understand correctly, you have studied and practiced African diasporic traditions and spiritual practices. And I'm wondering how those first came into your life, into your awareness, if they were something that was around you growing up, or something you discovered later in your life?
I would say that I discovered it later in life, but I have distinct memories of it being talked about by mostly the women in my family that we come from a family of dreamers. So folks were, and there wasn't a lot of discussion about what that meant, but what I understood from that, the dream world was a sacred world and had been understood as such by multiple generations of folks in my family. I have memories of, all of the kind of hoodoo sayings and beliefs around how to sweep one's house and what a baby looking up in a corner means. So I grew up with an understanding of the metaphysical, spiritual, supernatural, even if there wasn't a whole lot of, my family also, I think mystery was really important. It was a part of how those things were protected. So I was young when many of the elders who held that information passed in my family. So the ways that I have been uncovering, unconcealing, reconnecting with those things have been through that ancestral relationship and trainings with elders and the traditions that my lineages are from. But yes, definitely a part of my growing up in really sweet, mysterious ways.
And what does it mean to you to be a dreamer? You said that we are a family of dreamers. What does that mean?
It means that ancestral spiritual communication manifests in the dream world. It means that astral travel and future projections, that kind of clairvoyance happen through dreaming. It also has meant for me that it happens in my awake life as well, but that to be a dreamer is to be a seer whose work happens in the dream realm. I think I now understand that to also mean that dream work is about imagination and visioning. So as an artist, I connect with also being a dreamer in the sense of being able to create worlds.
Yeah, as you talk about that, I also think about what you were saying about your name and the translation of your name, which I think you said is one who is becoming, which is another way of like saying, I'm dreaming up something that I want to create to become something. So it's interesting that those connections there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, my work now is very much about not becoming. So, that translation of one who is coming to working in a way that is very much about, I think maybe the agency around to arrive or not. The technology of arriving or not are also in the universe of what it means to come, to be one who comes, one who is coming, and one who can create that. And to also consider that is, the one and the spiritual and cultural context is like the I as we, right? So to be of people who choose to arrive or not, to be of that village, that lineage, and not about me, the singular individual.
And when you say arrive, like what are you referring to arriving?
In any capacity. I think about that particularly around gender and genderedness, gender embodiedness, and what shape-shifting technologies look like as it relates to gender. I think about arriving in terms of the ways that, this is a kind of political intervention in it, the way that capitalism requires a kind of stasis, right? Like it has to be in equilibrium to work. So if there is not participation, or if I don't allow my body or my work to be a part of that as a gesture of unarriving, and really the kind of scientific, metaphysical connection to like quantum thought and quantum being, to choose which plane of existence I want to operate on at any given time or not.
Yeah. To arrive in this world or to not arrive in this world, or to arrive at this gender or that gender, or to be in between, to be fluid.
Or in the fantastic, the kind of ultimate invisibility, to do neither, right? What happens if you choose none of it? And not about it being a death or erasure, but about a kind of cosmic invisibility.
Well, let's bring this into a slightly more concrete, as much as we can make concrete the invisible. And can you tell us about your current project you're working on, the Illumination Catalog?
Yeah, I would love to. Illumination Catalog is a part of a larger constellation of artworks called the On Arrival Experiments, and which is centering dark matter and dark energy. Illumination Catalog has become this space where I am both digging into the futurity of Black trans life and imagination and honoring losses. And there's an equity there. I'm working through trying to kind of reimagine the use of the word balance, because it's not about that in those kind of like equal terms, but to ensure that the work I'm doing around deaths and transitions have a counterpoint that allows for me to be healthy in the work, but also doesn't like center transness in a conversation around death and loss. So in Illumination Catalog, two main things are happening. One of them is these ceremonies that I'm doing around the country at every site where a Black, Indigenous, person of color who is transgender, intersex, or gender nonconforming have been murdered. And in those spaces, conducting rituals to uplift and to protect and to honor that life was lost. And on the other major component of the work is I'm creating what I'm calling a Black trans cosmic map. So I'm doing story circles with Black trans folk also around the country about their lives, about birth dates, and doing research around the cosmology of all of that. So it becomes a space where there's a portal of connection between transcestors and Black trans folk, as well as a space to not feel alone on any plane. So to know that like there's a cosmic relationship between our living and also our dying, but like to focus on the ways that, the skies respond when we come into the world. They do. They actually do. So the work is to show that for everybody, but certainly for Black trans folks who are experiencing, particularly Black trans women, right, experiencing such high rates of vulnerability and danger, like to show something else.
Yeah. So this is like to me, it almost feels like a living, breathing organism that you are living inside of and feeding and just moving with until it ends, which who knows when it will end, at least as far as, or when you will step off the boat per se, because I'm sure the work will continue to grow. But one of the things that you said that you're asking in this work is, how do the cosmos respond to our traumatic deaths? And I'm wondering what, if anything, have you discovered in terms of a response to that question?
So far, we've discovered, and we're at the beginning of I won't say the beginning, I think we maybe have about 20 charts of transcestors. So we're starting at 2018 to today. So they're something like 150 at this point. So that's, 20 isn't really enough data yet. But what we're learning so far for sure is that the full moon is, as we know from folklore and, talking about the energies of the full moon pool, is that it is often connected to when folks have been murdered. We've also been learning that this is true for transitions as well, that Mars is usually in the picture, some capacity, but that there is also, and I couldn't quite voice this the way I want to yet because we're still learning it, but we're learning that there is a connection between the United States chart, its astrological chart, and some of these new laws that are coming up, and the murders. So essentially, we could call it karma, we can talk about the ways that our human action on this plane connects cosmically, because the ways that the laws are being written and the ways that this country has come to be has actually set itself up for the assault on trans people, right? So that there's a cosmic connection to this political legal. So some of what we will be doing with more of that data is to, I'm writing about it and it'll be a part of this website, but to know that there is a linkage that's not just about what gets written into law on this plane, but it becomes a reflection cosmically that, the effects thereof, especially if we're thinking of, the chart of the United States, like we're talking about hundreds of years now in the future from when that chart happened and still seeing the effects.
Yeah. I want to take a quick break to offer you a gift. I work with many queer folks who struggle with self-esteem, self-acceptance, and confidence. And I get it. Growing up queer is no cakewalk. Living in a world filled with homophobia and oppression can take its toll. Having the strength to be your true self can be a challenge. But you can change that. So if you'd like support taking the first few steps, head over to my website and grab the free mini course, The Self-Confident Queer. Just go to queerhealingjourneys.com/confident. This mini course will walk you through 3 simple steps to help you begin to build your self-worth and confidence today. So head over to queerhealingjourneys.com/confident and get the free course today. Okay, now back to the conversation. So I wonder if you could share a little bit more about what the ceremonial aspect or ritual aspect of this work looks like. Maybe paint us a picture. So for those of us who haven't seen it or just are curious to know what that looks like and what that is for you.
Mm-hmm. Most people haven't seen it, so that's good. It's designed to be solo. There's never an invited audience to them. Some of that was by design, wanting to really highlight that, these are folks who are, for the most part, losing their lives alone. Mm-hmm. And also not to, again, invite more mourning for people. And then lastly, COVID. So thinking through like what it would mean to ask people to gather. And I'm wanting to be really thoughtful about when I do that. So the ceremonies all happen early in the morning, as close to sunrise as possible. And I am an all white, and it's deep prayer work no matter what I'm doing. So sometimes that looks like, my kneeling on the ground. I'm also a spiritual herbalist and come through a lineage of medicine workers. And so I bring those things with me. So there are things that there's burning, that things that get offered to the earth, gets offered to the environment that I'm in, depending on what that is. And there's dancing, sometimes there's singing, and they last anywhere from 15 minutes to maybe 30. I don't think I've gone longer than 30. And it's usually because it's not always safe for me to be in the spaces for very long. Some of the places where these things have happened are in areas where, there's high rates of gun violence. It's a part of the story, the conversations around crime and poverty, how all of that is racialized. So it is sometimes important for me to be and do the work as deeply as I possibly can for the amount of time that it's safe to do it. Mm-hmm. And I take photographs and I audio record. So a part of what will be shared later as a part of an exhibition are those materials. And then I'm also making tree essences or flower essences from each space. So there is after, of course, all of the offerings and the prayer work and rituals happen, then I collect materials for those tree essences. So each space has their own.
Yeah, thank you for that. Because I was curious. I wasn't sure, is this more of a ritual? Is it more of a performance? Is it a community healing event? Because I could see how maybe notifying some of the relatives or family members or community members of the victim could be a healing process, but I also understand not wanting to trigger any more grief or mourning. But I guess I was also wondering, if you were planning to maybe eventually, when the piece is up, let those people know, or if you're just allowing it to be more of an organic discovery or something like that.
Those are really great questions. I do plan to, the website should be launched at the end of this month, early next month, and there will be a calendar so folks can follow where the rituals are happening next. And I have been making contact with local organizers and community wherever I go so that, one, we can uplift the folks who are on the ground doing that work all of the time. Right. So, recognizing my role as a visitor and support, and a visitor. So making sure that folks who are doing the work all the time are uplifted and also communicating, because they know the land, they know the people. So that becomes a space where folks do learn what's happening and where we'll be and who we're honoring. And sometimes that leads to being connected to family friends who are always grateful. And these are recent deaths. So oftentimes folks are like, thank you so much for it, but I can't. So there is some of that communication, and always to let the folks know that there's nothing that they need to do or are being asked to do.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if you consider this work like a kind of psychopomp work or healing of the land or clearing of the energetic space or anything like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is fully and completely deeply ceremonial. So there's somebody later can talk about the relationship between performance and ritual. For this, I'm thinking very much about like the work of this is ritual and ceremony. Yes, there are aspects of it that'll be performative for folks who witness it in that way, but that's not what I'm there to do. So because it is work on site or at site, there is, ancestor work. It is automatically, for me, reparative work for the land as well. So an honoring of the land and a clearing and protection, because it is, not just about the story of that particular ancestor being honored, but the trying to protect from the possibility of future harm, in addition to wanting to release anything that's stuck there energetically, spiritually, hopefully for that ancestor, uniting them with anything energetically, spiritually that is left and on that space, on that land, in that space. Yeah, that connection and relationship between the ancestor work and the work on the with the land is untetherable.
Great. So I want to pivot a little bit and talk more about the Black Trans Cosmic Map portion of the project. And I wonder if you can share a little bit more about like who are the people you're inviting in to do that work with, and what does that look like, and what is, just a little bit more about that piece.
It's so good. So I'm smiling because it really is it's a special invitation to sit with Black, transgender, gender nonconforming, intersex folk of all ages and birthplaces. And so I've been focusing on folks who identify as Black, African ancestor with African ancestry in the United States, but that has also called in folks who have immigrated to the U.S. and beyond. So I think that, at this point, it's not about, at least in terms of the futurity aspect of the work, is not about the U.S. I started in February of 2021. And the first person that I sat with was a trans man from Cleveland, Ohio, which was really sweet because that's where I'm from and where the first rituals happened. And we've gone all over from there and we'll continue to. So any person of African ancestry who is transgender, gender nonconforming, or intersex, we're sitting in circle with.
And are you doing this one-on-one, or are you doing this in group settings, or what does that space look like?
Right now it's one-on-one. Yeah, thank you. It's one-on-one now. Pandemic required it. And it taught me that having those kinds of conversations with people in an intimate setting has been really useful and I think really therapeutic for folk. A lot of medicine work happens in those conversations by nature of the way that I show up and the openness that folks have gifted to the process. And it's also about whatever they want it to be about. So, I'm thinking about the poetics of spirituality and all of that in it. but it doesn't mean that someone who sits with me needs to have that lens. It's not conditioned in any way other than like, talking about people's transitions and lives. And that's everybody. So yeah, they're one-on-one, but there will be, fingers crossed, prayers up, all of that with COVID, starting to do a few group story sharing circles just to have that, I don't know, having community around it too. It'll be new because I've not been able to do it that way, but I'm trying to do the first one of those in the summer of 22 of this year.
Yeah, I guess the therapist and the healer in me can really imagine, the possibility for connection and healing and a group process and transformation in that way of really, sharing your story, quote, publicly, but still in a group of your peers to really feel seen and understood in that way that I'm sure a lot of Black, trans, POC, non-binary folks really feel, and to really feel that sense of connection.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really want for folks to feel the same, or however it can be possible for them, for people to feel the kind of like joy and I don't know, just the blessing it is to know that I'm not alone and to hear ways of articulating gender and transness in like wildly different ways. Like the languaging is also really powerful, and including the folks who are like, I don't use that language at all. And the folks who, recondition the way that I think about transitioning by saying, I came in the world this way. I didn't, there was no transition for me. I've been becoming myself my entire life. And I knew that immediately. I came in the world with that. To folks who have a distinct, like, on this day, I talked to this person, and that was the beginning of my journey. That kind of multiplicity, I think, is really important for folks to hear, but particularly for trans folks to hear, so that our unique individual journeys can be affirmed by just hearing a range of unique individual journeys. So that we are reminded that transness doesn't look one way, doesn't happen one way. And it's been a really beautifully affirming process for me to just hear that from so many people. Yeah, I want more people to have the possibility of that experience.
Yeah. So NiJas, I'm curious, after having done this work for a couple of years now, at least on this particular piece of the project, what some of your takeaways or your learnings have been, or maybe your epiphanies have been, if anything.
Trust your vision. Trust your vision. There was a lot of time where I was like, why am I setting myself up to do this thing? And knowing that I essentially, conceived of an idea that's probably going to be my life's work. And other epiphanies. Oh, wow. There have been so many. Slow down. They're all like, shh, coming to me. I guess the importance of consent and like making lots of space for people, especially with the invitation of folks to share really vulnerable information. That consent has to be asked and received multiple times in different ways, like to just like the importance of, so for everyone who does these story sharing is a part of a listserv email communication, and like there's kind of constant check-ins with folks about like, here's where the project is going, just so folks have autonomy and agency over their stories in the ways that it's told. And consent forward is a anchor for me, but it's been important to learn and relearn that like, oh no, you've got to be ready to ensure that folks are held all the time with regard to consent. Lastly, I'll share, I have learned that, or I guess it's been reaffirmed for me, that laughter and joy are critical to storytelling. And I have worked a bit on like being my human self in the room and not thinking of these as interviews, and ensuring that folks like really are with a person who cares about them, so that it is like your, the way that joy comes through, even sometimes when there are hard things being communicated, that folks know that those stories are held with care and love and with joy at the center, makes a big difference, which is a teacher for me in my life in general around the ways that, living with through joy is a practice, it's work.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
So you already shared a whole lot, so maybe you don't need to answer this question, but I always end the interview with the same inquiry, which is, can you share with us a person, practice, or experience that has supported your queer spirit to flourish?
I have to say a community of people, practitioners of the theatrical jazz aesthetic. Some of those teachers have been folks like Daniel Alexander Jones, Sharon Bridgeforth, Omi Oshun, Joni L. Jones, a powerhouse of Black queer performance writing, thinking, theatrical, spiritual talent, and folks who have been working with spirituality and creative practice for decades. That community of folks, that way of working has been a powerful teacher for me, and the ways that spirit, art, activism align and create life practice.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, those folks, and they continue, those circle of folks, that way of working continues to teach me and continues to lead.
Beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So NiJas, before we let you go, can you share with our listeners where they can find you and learn more about your work and maybe stay up to date on the Illumination Catalog and that kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. Happily. Illumination Catalog will be, the website will launch in April. So illuminationcatalog.com or .org, it'll take you to the same place. And catalog spelled GUE. And the same with Instagram. Illumination Catalog is a handle there. And I'm at the NWA Project. It's kind of a house between all the many things that's happening with the On Arrival experiments.
Great. And I will also have those links in the show notes so people can find them there too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, NiJas, thank you again for being here and sharing about your work in the world. And I'm really excited to see where this takes you and where this takes our world.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that. It's a really sweet experience to be able to share about spirituality in this way. So thank you for that invitation.
To find the resources we discussed today, find the show notes at thequeerspirit.com. Make sure you don't miss future episodes by following the show on Apple Podcasts or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for listening. Until next time, be well.